Hello, welcome back to I Got Board Game.
Board game.
I got board game.
Board game.
I'm Ben,
I'm John.
and today we are here to review a slightly older game, but definitely more kind of a modern. Some might even say classic. It did kind of jump onto the scene pretty strong years ago when it came out, and so that game
Is Alan Rickman's Sheriff of Nottingham.
Is that real?
Yeah, he was in Robin Hood. I forget which one, but yeah.
Oh, okay, so the movie was actually a Robin Hood movie.
Yeah, it was a Robin Hood movie. I forget which one it was.
Okay, yeah, we're playing Alan Rickman today.
Yeah, but
no,
Sheriff
of Nottingham. Sheriff of Nottingham.
Da, 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 da.
So Sheriff of Nottingham is a game by Arcane Wonders, and it came out back in, let me see,
probably a while ago.
2014.
Yep.
2014. And it is basically a social deduction game involving money, in-game money. Mm-hmm. Social deduction game for 3 to 5 players. And the box says it plays in about an hour, which I think is about right usually. Once you play it more, it maybe go down to 45 on like the higher player counts, but usually an hour is a good amount of time to really get into it and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And as you can see on the game, it is a Dice Tower Essential game. I believe it was the second game in the line of Dice Tower Essentials, which is basically, for you guys to know, Dice Tower, the Dice Tower is another YouTube channel, very big network of reviewers and people who put up board game related content, unboxings, playthroughs, founded by Tom Vassell. And so I got into board games partially by watching so many of his reviews. So if he sees this video one day, thank you, Mr. Vassell. And I still keep up with him when I can. But then what happened with the Dice Tower Essentials is basically his own kind of branding idea, where when he came across games that had already been produced, maybe in another country or something, and he saw it as like a game that is a modern kind of essential game to have in your collection, he would try to get the help from Arcane Wonders, a board game publisher, to get the rights to produce the game again, and then basically have this Dice Tower Essential branding on it, just kind of to point out that he believes that it is an essential game to have. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, Sheriff of Nottingham was one that he thought so, and we have played it quite a few times, right? Originally when it came out. And so we will get into our review of it and sharing our thoughts, experiences with it, but then first give you a brief idea of how the game plays as a social deduction game. And so to do that, I will share an image of the game set up. And so here we go. This image is from Board Game Geek. Sorry if it's dark. It was just one of the quick and cleaner pictures I could find of the game set up. And so during the game, you are all basically playing as merchants, trying to bring your goods into Nottingham. And then while you're playing, every round, one player is also going to be the sheriff, who is trying to, catch people who are sneaking in contraband, illegal goods into Nottingham. And so the way the game is going to be set up is everyone's going to get a player board, which has a different color and character on it, but they all function the same. It's basically your market stall. That's what it represents. And it's going to be your way to keep track of what goods you're successfully bringing into Nottingham, which will then be converted into money, which is ultimately the points in this game. Mm-hmm. And so everyone will have their market stall, their player board, and then they'll have, I believe they start with 50 money each. Yep. They'll have their own color corresponding little velvet bag. Mm-hmm. And they'll start with a hand of 6 goods. Mm-hmm. And then you'll have the rest of the goods, which are basically all the cards in the game. They're going to be shuffled. and they're going to be split up into these 3 decks, and 2 of them are going to be face up and one's going to be face down. And so basically the face up ones are the discard piles, but throughout the rounds, when players can get to draw cards, they can draw from these discard piles, from the top of these piles, or from the face down pile. But looking at the player board, which is helpful because it tracks your goods, it also is a turn reference for everyone. And so it goes through the steps where basically each round, like I mentioned, one person is going to be the sheriff. So they'll have this sheriff little marker in front of them. And they're going to be the ones who are ultimately going to inspect people's bags or let them come into Nottingham with their goods. But then at the start of a round, each player who isn't the sheriff will choose from their hand of cards any goods they want to discard. Just cards they don't want to play with or plan with or try to bring into Nottingham at that time. And so they will choose among the cards they have, which could be different goods like contraband, as I mentioned, but then also 4 regular goods, bread, chicken, cheese, and apples. And they can choose from among those up to 5 of the cards, and they can choose to discard them to basically draw new cards to replace them. And when they discard it, they'll discard all of the cards they're discarding into one of the discard piles, one of the 2 discard piles. And then they can choose to draw from a discard pile, from either discard pile, or draw from the face down deck. And once they start drawing from the face down
just to
deck,
quickly clarify, you don't discard it into the deck first. You choose what you're going to discard, and then you draw, and then you put your discard in. So you wouldn't have to like discard and draw the same card.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then the other rule with that is once you start drawing cards, you can, you could take 1 from this discard pile, 1 from the top of the other one, and then 1 from the face down pile. But once you start drawing from the face down pile, that's the only pile you can take from for that turn. And so each player will get to do this in turn order, right? Discarding, then drawing up. And then they will, I believe they move on to the phase where they're going to plan which goods they're going to try to bring into Nottingham. And the way to do that is they'll secretly, from their hand of cards, choose 1 through 5 of them. You can never put all 6, but 1 through 5 of them, and they can choose which ones to put into their own bag. And they'll do that secretly so no one else sees which goods specifically they're putting in. And then they'll snap it shut. And so these bags all have like a nice little snap seal to them. So that kind of like is to confirm and finalize your decision. So once you snap it, then you've decided. And then each player will then hand their bag to the sheriff. And when they do, they have to declare how many goods they're bringing in and which legal good type. And so there's certain rules about that, but in general, you always have to tell the right number of goods or cards you've put into the bag. But then, I mean, depending on whether they're all like legal or not, you have to say the right number of cards. But then you also always have to declare all your cards as one legal good, right? And this is where the social deduction bluffing part comes in, right? You're going to have to say, I'm bringing in 4, say, cheese, even though maybe not all 4 cards you put in there are cheese, right? But you have to choose one legal good that you're declaring it all as.
Look into my eyes, Ben. It is 4 apples.
Yeah, I shoved 5 chickens in here. and so you'll declare that to the sheriff player. And so the sheriff will receive each player's bags with these declarations. And then after that, the sheriff will have to decide for each player whether they're going to let them in or they're going to inspect their bag. And so when they let the player in, right, they believe that the person was telling the truth, the sheriff will give the bag back to that player, and then that player can open their own bag, take out the goods, and then they'll put them next to their player board in the corresponding spots which indicate which goods they are, right? All the legal goods will be put face up next to whether it's cheese, apples, chicken, or bread. But then any contraband cards that the person was able to sneak in with that will go face down at the top in the contraband section. And so then in that case, everyone, including the sheriff, will know that the person lied and got contraband in, but no one knows what contraband it was, because all these legal goods and contraband all have different money values, which again will be converted into money, which are points at the end of the game. And so, but then if the sheriff doesn't believe what a player declared, the sheriff can choose to open the bag. And once they open the snap seal of the bag, that's also kind of like the symbolizing the final decision, confirming that they're going to inspect your bag. And then the sheriff will pull out what cards are in there and look at them. And so if you were telling the truth, the sheriff will have to give you those goods. So you get those goods, and the sheriff himself has to pay you the penalty amount on each of those goods, because every card has a actual money amount and then also the penalty amount. And so that's the amount that the sheriff will have to pay for each card that he caught you incorrectly for. But if the sheriff inspects your bag and found that you are lying about just one thing, right? If you said 5 chickens, but one of them is actually an apple, then you will have to pay the sheriff for the penalty amount on that card you lied about, or the cards that you lied about. And the card that you lied about will be confiscated, and the sheriff will then will discard it into one of the discard piles, while the other goods you would still get back and be able to bring into Nottingham. And so then after that, all players will then draw up from the face down deck at the end of the round, just from the face down deck until they have 6 cards again. And then the sheriff marker will pass to the next player clockwise, and then you have another round. And the game will go like this until everyone has been the sheriff twice. And that'll be the last round, last turn of the game. And then everyone will count all the money value on the goods that they had, the legal goods that they had next to their market stand, and all the value on their contraband that they snuck in, and any money they had left at the end of the game. And whoever has the most money wins. And so one of the interesting parts of this game, not to mention pros and cons yet, but something I should have mentioned earlier too, is when people are declaring in the earlier phase of each round, when they're declaring to the sheriff what they're bringing in, and then the sheriff has to decide whether to inspect or not. One purpose of players' money, like their actual money, not on the goods they have, is they can use that money to bribe the sheriff. Making all kinds of deals, like, I will give you 5 money if you don't look at my bag, or I will give you 2 money if you do look at John's bag. So those are the kind of deals that also happen in this game, and that's why having money separately than your goods is important.
The other and the other thing about bribes is you can also offer goods that are either within your bag or on your market stall, or you can offer future actions that you will take, whether you're sheriff or not, in the future. But then, future promises are not binding.
Future promises aren't binding. Ones you say now are binding. Like if you do say, I'll pay you 5 if you don't open mine, and the sheriff gives you your bag back, you have to pay them that 5 you said. But yes, future promises are not binding. And so, that's basically all the rules of the game. And so we will move on now into the pros and cons. And
so as Ben explained, this is a pretty simple game. It's not super complicated. I think it's a really good idea in execution. I think the especially good thing about the game is the whole clicking of the bag. There's something very satisfying about putting your goods into it, clicking it, and then having to declare your kind of decision about whether you're telling the truth or lying, right? And it's something that's kind of like, it's sealed, right? So it's kind of like if you think of like a wax, like letter seal of approval kind of thing, and like you don't want to break it open, like it kind of has that same feeling. So there's something really satisfying about being a merchant, being like, here are my goods, sheriff. I'm telling you the truth, of course, about what I'm bringing in. And it's a really, really fun experience to get that kind of sense and feel, right? Because you're getting kind of the ability to do like the social deduction kind of deception / kind of haggling a little bit with the sheriff, and then the sheriff having to hear everybody's offers and stuff, having to decide like, who's telling me the truth? Is Ben really with that face? Would he ever tell the truth with that face? Probably not. But it's a really, really fun part of the Sheriff of Nottingham.
Yeah, I mean, I think just kind of, I mean, we can go on for a while talking about like the bluffing portion, right? And I think that's kind of what is important to emphasize, right? That it is a bluffing game, not so much about all this money that's going back and forth and goods, right? That's kind of like the material used in the transaction, but all surrounding the transaction is this bluffing game. And I think that is something that I really like about it. Since this came out obviously later than Werewolf and Resistance, which we've also reviewed, right? All those games are very pure social deduction games. But then to have one that has some kind of components that you're dealing with and including in the bluffing you're doing, I think that's like a nice step up from just a pure bluffing game, right? Not anything wrong with a pure bluffing game, right? That gets much more into, that focuses much more on, the story you're telling and such. But then when there's a component involved that gives you kind of more leeway or another dimension to bluff about, right? Like I imagine times when, when I've bluffed, right, you can just be like, Sheriff, this is 3 cheese. I mean bread, and it's like, did you say it wrong or are you bluffing and messing with me, right? I think it's just a really nice touch that a game that includes these components and these materials as something that then you can bluff about.
Yeah, and I think in that sense of the components, I do like the fact that there are some restrictions on how you can bluff or how much you can bluff, because it's not something, as you were saying, where in some of the more pure social, pure kind of bluffing type of games, you can kind of make up whatever you're going to bluff. In this game, there are, as we mentioned, there's certain things that you must follow, like you must declare the exact number of cards that you put in the bag, right? You can't bluff that number where you can say like, I put 2, but you actually put 3 cards, because then it kind of removes an element of the deception that people could bluff about. If that were to do, like if you were allowed to do that, the game would be a much more difficult game to kind of play around and kind of know what people are bluffing about and how to kind of balance what you get paid for and what you don't get paid for with goods or contrabands that you're trying to sneak in. But being able to be like confident of like, there's a certain amount of cards, but what the cards are, and then the fact that you're also forced to say only a single type of good, legal good, right? Where that merchants are restricted, but are they trying to be truthful with you? Because if they're being truthful and they say there's 4 cheeses or 4 chickens, it's a lot of money to pay if they actually are bringing in 4 chickens or 5. Sometimes some people have said that before. But then at the same time, conversely, it's like the more cards they're putting in, the more chances they're lying to you and they're not actually bringing things in. So it's one of those things of like, it helps kind of it gives the decision making for the sheriff a lot more weight about whether people are telling the truth or not, right?
But yeah, with what you're saying, I think that restriction actually is much more important than people might think, because not only does it in a way make the game fair, right, for like when you're the sheriff, right? Because if someone could bluff about anything, it does make it unfair for the sheriff to try to figure out, But then also I think in that restriction of forcing people to declare it all as one legal good too also helps make it fair, right? Because if you could literally declare any legal goods, you could always tell the truth and sneak in your whole hand of cards essentially, right? And so then that would just ultimately not really be a bluffing game at all, right? And so that kind of puts a pressure on the players that maybe at some point they need to bluff to stay in the game, or if they're just always telling the truth and they're just depending on their hand of cards, like, to declare the truth, I can only sneak in one good at a time. It's like, you're not going to get enough points that way, right? And so I think all of that is so smart with that restriction. But then also, I think the restriction is so important because it makes the game easier for people to get into, right? And that's kind of also getting at what you're saying about comparing to those pure social deduction games, right? Where people then really have to be on their feet about reasoning everything through that anyone is saying about anything in the game, right? Where then in having the restriction and being all about this exchange of goods, then it focuses players, especially new players, on, okay, this is the only thing I need to bluff about, right? Everything else, like, I don't need to come up with a story of like, oh, I heard this person make this sound at night when we were sleeping, or anything like that, right? It's just
looking at you, Mafia.
Yeah, it's very much just the goods themselves, and how am I gonna bluff or play the other player this way, right? And so, yeah, I think that's a small design detail, but it makes such a big difference in a game like this, making it more accessible and fair. And then also, I think, along with the components, right, a cool detail is those 3 draw piles, right, that I mentioned during setup, where it's not just one big draw pile where then when it's your turn, you just have to draw from the top of the deck, right? There's a way that you can kind of plan a little bit where you can see what's in the face up discard piles. And so you can even try to draw from those to get more goods that you maybe want to sneak in, right? Like if you already have 3 apples and you see apples on the top of the deck, it's like, okay, sure, I'm gonna discard at least 1 card so that I can draw another apple, so I'll have 4 to safely sneak in. And the more of the good you trying to sneak in, as John mentioned, like there's less of a chance that the sheriff might believe you, right? It's like, really, you somehow got 5 apples. It's like, if you
you saw me draw 2 of them.
Yeah, you can do it, right? But then even that's a really good point that you bring up, right? That kind of line of that people might say, because yeah, you saw me draw 2, and then it's like, in reality, you do have 5, but you actually put in 4 in a contraband,
Yeah.
And so I think that's another cool way of both just kind of the options with drawing your cards and building up your hand of goods that you can play with. But then also it is another place where there could be a little bit of bluffing happening, right? You're seeing people take cards, or you're even seeing people take contraband, but then maybe they'll never put the contraband in the bag, just make you think that at some turn they are, but they maybe never do.
Maybe this round, maybe this round, but yeah. So,
and then I think other small pros, I would say a big pro still is the bribing. I think that adds a lot to the game. It's I think in a game that involves money, like any kind of board game that involves money, that is something that some players end up asking about, right? Like there are those friends who are like, this game has money, so can I like trade with you, or can
I use this money to do something,
like make some deals? And it's like, in this game you can, and it's all part of the bluffing and social aspect. And that also then leads to like really funny moments when you're like paying the sheriff to open someone else's bag, and everyone can get in on it, right? It's not like necessarily a turn by turn kind of thing. Like obviously there's certain phases which are done in turn order, like the discarding and drawing cards. But then when you're actually like handing the bag to the sheriff and the sheriff has to decide, that can happen in basically any order that the sheriff wants, right? As long as everyone's giving their bags at the same time, and then the sheriff has that whole time then to go through each bag and decide for each player, right? And I think yeah, it definitely adds a lot to the enjoyment of the game when you can start kind of just poking at other people, right? You see other players ahead, you think they're being fishy, but maybe the sheriff isn't catching on. You're like, no, I'll pay you a little bit if you open their bag, but believe me, you want to open their bag anyway,
But I put 5 apples. Of course I did, right? And that's the thing, right? And because then, like, if you pay money to open somebody else's bag, the person whose bag is being told to be open, they could be like, I'll give you 4 gold over
like a counter
that
offer.
bribe as a counter offer, so you don't open my bag, And you check that guy's bag because that sounds fishy now to me.
And then I think something like, well, I don't know if you were going to say something else about that, but the other part that always sticks in my head with these bribes is a small pro for me that I've done with my friends quite a few times is we play this game with an accent, with an English accent, or we all try to do it.
English
I think that just makes it so much more funny. Oh gosh, that part is so memorable. I think actually I learned about it from my friend Albert. So Albert Kim, if you're watching this, shout out to you for teaching us to play it that way. I think it's so funny then when you're doing all this kind of funny bribing stuff, but then also doing it with an accent.
Please,
and then
please,
you might not be good at an accent, so you're just like repeating the same phrase that you can say in the accent.
Like, don't make me pay.
I don't believe him. Don't check my bag, please. Please, sir. A little more, sir.
Sorry for any British viewers. We mean nothing. We mean no harm.
But yes, that's a jumping into a small pro of mine. Playing with an accent is so funny.
Yep.
And then another small pro I was going to get at is then just the components themselves. Like we mentioned, the velvet bag with the snap, that's so nice. And after playing with it several times, like the game itself, like the bags feel very durable. Like I haven't had any that like break or anything from all the snapping and opening. So it feels pretty good quality, at least the version I have, which is the first edition. And we'll actually talk about the second edition a little bit toward the end of this video. We do want to mention that because there are some thoughts we have on the second edition that has come out more recently in the last year or two. But at least with the first edition by Arcane Wonders, the quality is good. It's a nice size box, and it came with if you saw in the picture of the setup, there was this like tray for the 3 decks of cards, so it actually comes with that. Here, let me kind of open mine and kind of show how it is. Hopefully it's not too messy. This is kind of how it is inside. You have the player boards, which are really sturdy cardboard. And then you have this whole insert, which then has this tray for the different denominations of coins, money, and then the 3 wells for the decks of cards. And those 3 wells you can actually take out and then put it on your table if you want that way to hold the 3 decks in place while you're playing the game. So very, very nice setup. And then a whole bunch of the goods cards, like goods and contraband cards together. The box says there's at least 200 cards. And so I think that's really good because it, for a game where you do have these goods that you're then bluffing and trying to exchange around in a way, it makes it really hard to count cards. And I think that's important.
So if you're super meta, you probably can learn how to count the cards, but just knowing that,
And then I think one last thing I would mention, because this does relate back to the rules too, is looking at one of the player boards. I think the art is okay. Like it's clean art, like really well detailed and such. But I just don't necessarily like the style itself, but it's all right. For this kind of game, it's fitting, I think, how the characters look. But then as you can see, and we mentioned in the rules, right, your market stall, this player board, is both functional, which is smart. It just has the list of each phase in a round, which is really helpful. And then it has the sections for your legal goods on both sides and contraband at top. So it helps you track all the goods that you're getting and accumulating throughout the game. But then also what it does is it has these amounts under each good, which I didn't mention in the rules, is at the end of the game, you're not only scoring all the cards you have, like all the cheese cards you have on this side, all the apples you have on this side, which all have their point value. which are all consistent point values too, just so you know. But they do, all apples have the same value, but they could be different from cheese. But then all the cheese cards have their own money value. So you're counting those up. You're adding the values of any contraband you have that were face down that you snuck in, and then any money tokens you actually still have. But then also for each good, you're gonna look among all the players to see who has the most of that good and who has the second most of that good, like card count wise, card number wise. And so those players will also get extra bonuses. The king and queen bonus are what they're called. And so I think that little detail is kind of nice. It's not something you necessarily think about too much during the game. Like you could plan around it. Like, you know, depending on your starting hand, you might strategize like, okay, this game, I'm going to try to make sure I at least get the most apples since I can get so many apples in right now. But then it's not something you have to focus on either, right? If you can just, in a sense, get a whole lot of goods in, that could outweigh the bonuses of the king and queen bonuses of the goods. But it is a nice touch to have that as a way that people can also focus and have a goal versus just like, I'll sneak in anything I can get, right? But it's like, no, maybe this thing would be better to sneak in since I already have a few of this good versus 0 of the other good, you know? So it's just a way that kind of gives players a direction or a little thing to maybe strategize around, which is a nice touch.
Oh, one other small pro I'm going to say about this game too that I forgot to mention is this game can play up to 5 players, which is also unique. So there's not a lot of games that are balanced or built around having 5 players. This game actually is balanced and built with a 5th player in mind to play the game. Because then in effect, what you have is 4 players who are doing the merchant round, and then you have the other person being the sheriff. And then obviously that rotates as we just mentioned. So it's pretty unique to be able to find games that can play 5 players. So this is actually a really solid game for that. So
That's
I will
true.
mention that as a pretty significant, as a part of the pros section of this
That's
game.
true, because a lot of those also pure deduction games, social deduction games we mentioned, those play like at least 5 players, right? And then like, you know, resistance is 5 to 10, but then 5 also doesn't work well.
Yeah. So for the type of like social deduction with bluffing and things involved, typically they usually require larger counts of players to play or to have kind of more of a fun time with them. This game, it's kind of the reverse where it's like 5 is the maximum, but it's actually like perfectly balanced to have a really good time with the 5 players. Right.
And then we'll mention also later that this game does have an expansion that then allows up to 6 players, but also includes a way to play with 6 players that doesn't make the game even longer, which is a smart approach. And so we'll mention that also later when we just kind of talk about the expansion at the end of this. But so with all those pros then, going on to any cons we have for this game, John?
Yeah, so I'll say one of the cons of this game is, okay, I'll start off with this one. Sometimes with the way that the card, your luck of the draw or kind of the drawing, sometimes you can be put in either a really bad position or ironically, or in a really good position that really there's not a lot of kind of control over. That's kind of based on how you shuffle and stuff or how people are discarding if they're not paying attention. But there have been some games that I've played where I think there was one game that I got away with never needing to lie and being able to get 4 to 5 goods in almost every single round because of just the nature of how kind of things were drawn and stuff. So it was like kind of playing the bluffing game, but almost like, why? I don't even need to play the bluffing game. I'm just kind of auto winning the game because, you know, being able to declare that many goods to just get it in and kind of having the assurance of safety is kind of a nice thing, but it's pretty rare to do in this game and it's not common, but it does happen. But then I would say the same way, conversely, there are times where you're forced to draw, like when you draw from the piles and you end up drawing like a hand of like 4 or 5 contrabands and you're just like, what do I do with this? kind of situation. It's a small con. I don't think it's a huge game breaker, of course, but it's just like, as you know, with randomization or kind of like this draw count, though you have the 2 draw decks to help mitigate somewhat, sometimes that can happen. And it does kind of pull away from the whole concept of like, what am I supposed to do with the bluffing? What am I supposed to do with the drawing, right? If I'm already put in a position where it's like, oh, easy game, or I have to lie every single round and this sucks because I'm pretty sure I'm always going to get caught kind of situation. So.
Yeah, I think actually what you mentioned is one of the things that has come up in discussion with friends who we've played this with, right? Where it's like, do I actually need to bluff to win this game, right? Because I think part of it is the idea of even if you're caught, you get to keep the goods that you declared legally, right? Like if you said like 5 chickens, but 2 of them are apples, like, yeah, you'll have to pay for those 2 apples, but you still get the chickens, right? Where it's like, it does kind of, bring into question if you actually need to bluff. And that's the thing that I don't know if we've really like played it a bunch to prove, but I think in theory, you would need to, in the sense of that, considering chance being equal for everyone, right? That the player who, if everyone can sneak in the same amount of goods every turn, maybe all legal goods every turn, but then on one turn, one person sneaks in 1 contraband, then that person will win the game, right? Just point wise, getting that extra little boost in points. But then, if that's not the case, and of course, like you've been mentioning, like with chance and the cards and the draw, it's like, then it does bring into question, like, yeah, do I need to bluff, or can I, if the situation turns out that well for me, maybe I just never have to. And so that is one of the cons for me. I am hesitant to call it a big con. It is something that maybe comes up quite often when people play the game, but I just don't think it's a big con because it's you can't control the chance, so you can't necessarily prove that you'll always be able to not bluff and still win the game. But it just is something that maybe people end up thinking about theoretically with how the game goes. And then the other thing you mentioned is also another con of mine, the feeling of not just the chance with the cards, but the turn order in which players go to discard and then draw cards. Like when we played, we've almost always had people on their turn like discard contraband onto the discard piles, and then that just immediately throws off your turn later if your plan was, oh, I'm going to draw that top apple card, right? And then immediately it's covered by 3 contraband. It's like, I'm not going to draw like 3 contraband just to get to that 1 apple when it comes to my turn, right? And so, and I guess that's a con because it kind of limits that one phase that you have to feel like you can control your hand that you're going to be planning with, right? Because basically you have 2 main decision points, right? The cards you're trading out and in, and then what you're actually trying to sneak into Nottingham. Aside from all the bluffing that can happen and all that, right? Those are the kind of 2 concrete moments where you feel like you have control or choice in your planning through the game. But then when something like that can happen during one of that discard or trading out phase, then that already like limits the control you can feel like you have in the game.
Yeah. And I would say they try to mitigate it by the fact that the sheriff rotates. And so your position as the player who gets to go into the market also changes. So like if you're just about to become the sheriff, then you get the first choice of the market. But after you're sheriff, in the next round after, you are the last player who touches the market, right? So it's kind of like, honestly, you really can't plan. You just have to wait for everybody else to do theirs and then kind of make your decision based on what you see on the market board. So there is a little bit of that. I think that's their way of trying to mitigate it. And that's why I think it's 2 rounds of it going around. So at least you have that option. But I will say, yeah, it does feel like sometimes you get the short end of the stick just because it's like, how much planning can I really have? With that being said, another con that I have in the game is sometimes the snowbally feeling of the game, of when a certain player maybe gets pretty far ahead. It does feel like this game has a difficult time of once someone gets ahead, how like for you to be able to catch up to that player who's gotten ahead. I think there was one time we played a game where I think somebody was playing sheriff, and I think they caught somebody on like their turn as sheriff. Everybody had snuck it in, and I think everybody got caught. So they ended up having like 90 something gold or like coins by the end of their sheriff round. And that was like the first round, like the first wave of passing the sheriff around. And at that point, it's like they're already like 40 points over everybody, and people have lost points. So technically they're like 50 points ahead. And that's not including them putting out their own goods at that point, right? And then at that point, like literally all they have to do is just sit around, and they don't have to like risk anything at that point. And if that happens, like there's not much that other players can do about it if someone is able to get that far ahead somehow, or like they lie, or like they told the truth and then the sheriff had to pay like a ton of money to one player, right? And that happens maybe like 3 or 4 rounds in a row, and they end up getting a stack of like 20 or 30 coins, right? So I'd say like sometimes the snowballing can happen in some games, and then it just doesn't feel like there's a chance to get back into it.
I think for me, I think 2 small cons I have. I think my last 2 cons are relating to actually the length of the game, because I would say this game you want to play with at least 4 players. I think John, before this, you had looked up and saw that there are slightly different setup for 3 players, right? Yeah. But you know, to get the most enjoyment, I would say is like having this kind of banter going on and bluffing and happening with more players, so 4 or 5 players. But then I would say like at 5 players, the game can feel kind of long for everyone to be sheriff twice. Like you can feel like it drags on, but at the same time, you want everyone to be it twice because it's kind of unfair to just have 1 round to go around as sheriff. And so yeah, there's that little part that can feel like the game is too long, but I think it's a small con because that's mainly on the players and how much time they give each other to tell their stories and all the bluffing, you know, and you can enjoy it, but you don't need to drag out the game focusing on doing that. And so if you don't, then you know the higher player counts are still fine. It won't feel like it drags on, but that's just something to be aware of. But then the other small con is, and this is like the smallest con, is you're counting up a lot of money at the end of the game.
There is a lot of counting,
and that's, you know, you get really high scores like 100 something, maybe more than 100 something, 200 something. And so, you know, it just
is high, but definitely
but it is just one of those games where you're like adding a bunch of numbers together at the end, right? Like 7 times like these 6 items plus this 6 times the 5 points per each one, and then all my individual coins, and then plus the contraband amounts, and then declaring who's king and queen for each good. Like it's just a lot of math for people. It's not hard math at all, obviously, but it's just more like it's one of those games, right? That's going to be a high value at the end versus just like, you know, a game where it's like, oh, 25 points versus 27 points, you know? And so just that's something to be aware of. Really small con, just knowing that it's a high point value game at the end.
So I was going to say one other small con that I have is I actually wish that contrabands were a little stronger in the game or had more impact. There was, I know there's been a couple games I've played where I've tried to do more contrabands in my play and was successful in actually getting quite a number. I think I ended up having like 5 or 6 at the end of one game. So it was quite a lot, right? Like that's actually a pretty high number. I don't think we usually get more than like 8 or 10 contrabands.
Oh yeah.
Maybe we play weird. Maybe other people who played the game are like, what are you talking about? I got like 25 contraband or whatever, right? But I felt like at least when we've played the game, like it's good to get contrabands, but one of the things that contrabands tend not to do is they don't add value to the legal goods that you're putting into the game. And as we were saying, one of the ways of getting points is being the leader in the legal goods. So when you're declaring or like when you're getting contrabands in, cool, like it's cool that they have like a point value, but they're not adding to your illegal goods. And there is a component of you're racing to try to get the most goods in a particular like stall to get the extra points there. And so your contrabands don't actually help there. And they do give you points, right? They give you like the, I think it's like 6 to 10 bonus, maybe 12.
Yeah, I think it's like
depending on
it's
which
usually
types of
like
contrabands.
2 or 3 times a single legal good usually.
Exactly. But like sometimes it almost feels like it's actually not that much of a amount higher than the other goods. And if you get caught, you're losing money as well, right? Which is it's a pretty high risk. So there's kind of a point where it's almost like, are contrabands even worth? And this kind of goes back to one of the cons you mentioned about like bluffing. It's like, is it even worth it to even try to put contrabands into your deck when you could, as you were saying, just fake legal goods? And if you happen to get the legal goods in, that means you're continuing your race in that particular category, right? And you also get like a small point bonus, right? So that's like a smaller con. I don't know if expansions added more. I think they do add some things about
I think I was going to mention this. I think the expansion tries to adjust that in a certain way. And so actually, but those are all our cons, right? And so actually I will then mention the expansion right now. So you have Sheriff of Nottingham Merry Men expansion. If you guys know Robin Hood and the Merry Men, right? So that's kind of the theme here. And so this actually adds, I believe it's kind of 4 modules that you can choose which ones to add in. I think one of the main ones for me is the 6-player. So it just has a board for a 6-player, which I think is great, right? A game that can play 5 or 6 players now, that's great. But then the smart thing they also did is they included this deputies module, which I think is the way they either say you should, like you're required to, or you at least should play with the deputies module if you're doing 6 players, because the way it works is it, when you're adding the 6th player, you think the game would then just be even longer, right? For everyone to be sheriff, that's 12 rounds of the game, right? Which can feel pretty long. But then with the deputies module, instead of the sheriff, you have every round 2 players being deputies, which are basically sheriffs for that round. So 2 sheriffs in a given round. And so then they kind of get to discuss with each other if they should inspect the bag, or they can be like, no, you can inspect it, but then I don't want to get penalized if it's wrong, so it's kind of a little cool, partnership each round, and it's randomly determined too, which is also nice. It's not kind of this stuck in a clockwise way, so you could be paired with someone else when you're the deputy. And then they basically have like a pot, which is basically a tile where all the penalty money they get goes on, and then at the end of the whole round they split it among themselves, right? Unless they had deals in between where, again, like one of them's like, no, you can inspect that bag and you can get whatever penalty or pay whatever penalty for that one. And so that keeps the game quick, because then if 2 players are the deputies, right, that's just 3 pairings if you're playing with 6 players, and then 3 pairings again, right? So it reduces the game to not 12 rounds, but just 6 rounds. So it kind of makes the higher player count still play quickly. The other 2 modules, one is the black market, which is kind of, I guess, an answer to what John was getting at, where there's basically, I think maybe 3 black market cards that are revealed at a time, which then are ways to players can get bonus points, which is quite a bit of points. I think like maybe 30 points or something around there for collecting sets of contraband, So I think it's like, there could be a black market card that says the player who has 3 pepper, which is a contraband in Nottingham, they can reveal that they got 3 contraband pepper, right? And it doesn't have to be all at once, right? You don't have to sneak in 3 peppers in one try, but at some point, once you've had collected up to 3 pepper, you can reveal it and claim that bonus card, those bonus points. And so that, in a sense, incentivizes trying to sneak in contraband more, but then specifically sets of contraband too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then the last module is, I think, laws, which I don't actually know if I've played with. I played with the other ones. And then laws, so I'm not exactly sure how that one works. It looks like it's a deck of cards. Maybe every round there's a new law that's revealed, and there's always one law in place. But I did see one example that's like chickens are considered contraband. So, it could just be slight rule changing for the round or however much time. And so that's kind of interesting. It just kind of seems like it mixes up how players might have to play the game or make their decisions on a given round. But yeah, so that's what the expansion adds. And this isn't a review of the expansion, it's the base game, but I would say I think this is a really good one and an important one for the game to either address that issue John was talking about, address the length that we've mentioned, but then also increasing it to 6 players. I think those are all kind of the pluses to this expansion that make it, I think, important. And so, yeah, so those were our pros and cons on the game, and then a little look at the expansion. But then the last thing maybe we should save it to the very end to talk about the second edition. But then for now, we will have John. We'll move on to John guesses the weight and gives us his rating.
So in terms of rating, as I said, like I think, as you've heard us in this review, it's a very solid game. It's a good different kind of social deduction bluffing game. It's very fun to play. It's very easy to get into for people. So it's definitely an easy learning curve, and you can have a lot of fun with this kind of game, with kind of bluffing and whether you accent or not, or just the negotiations that happen and all of that. While there are some cons, a lot of them are kind of more the chance cons overall. A couple of maybe small balance feel issues, but again, maybe with an expansion it might address it. But overall, like, you can still have a good time with the game. And so I would say that it's all solid on those fronts. So my personal rating for the game is a 7.5 total for the game. I think what I would consider normally maybe just a 7.25 for what it is. I think just the ability for playing 5 players with the base game, not including the expansion, actually is enough to give it that 0.25 rating up into the 7.5, just because it is hard to find a lot of games for 5 players. A lot of times when you get people together, you'll maybe have like maybe 2 couple pairings and then like an extra friend or something like that, right? Or you just that tag along person who ends up joining your game night, who maybe is a new person who's joining your game night or something, and you go beyond your expanded group of maybe 4 people, or you maybe had 6 normally and then somebody drops out, so you only have 5, right? Like 5 seems to come up a lot for board game nights for some reason, and it's really hard to find really good balanced 5-player games.
Who is that 5th friend of ours, John?
I don't know, but it always happens. You gotta kick them out. No, just kidding. But I think just being able to play 5 in a very balanced way is really, really nice with this game. And then with all of the components of not being too long overall, even, with that, I think makes it that. And then if I were to guess the weight, I'm gonna say 2.02 for the weight.
2.02, okay. So for me, I think my rating for this game is mostly based on how refreshing it feels as a bluffing game. Both refreshing and approachable for people, because obviously this came out like around 6-7 years ago, but I still kind of remember the feeling back then of jumping into a new game that's bluffing, where back then the ones that all my friends would know was the Resistance and Werewolf Mafia, but
BS,
that was
the card game. BS, the card game.
Oh gosh. But it felt like back then there were only a handful of bluffing games, right? Maybe it's because I wasn't that into the board game hobby at that time, like just getting into it. But obviously over the years, then there have been a lot more different kinds of takes on the bluffing genre and the deduction genre and social deduction. But at the time, it felt very refreshing and different. It was approachable, and I think part of the theme and dealing with the money would make it slightly more approachable in the sense of, you might have friends who just don't like the idea of bluffing, right? Especially in a game like Resistance, where you're trying to lie about like killing each other or failing missions and stuff like that seem more serious things to be lying about, where then this is just like contained in dealing with like goods and money. It's like a lighter theme, and so I think that all made it more welcoming for people and easy to learn and get on board with as a bluffing game. And then the fun of playing with an accent is just you laugh a lot when you do these kind of things with the game. And I think it's obviously like fitting with the theme of the game to have fun doing that, you know. And so yeah, with all that kind of enjoyment and the laughs, I give this game a 7.5, stealing my rating.
Nope.
But then
I'm right.
going on
I'm
to the
first.
weight, let's see how John did. So let's go to Board Game Geek. And
I
so
actually want a copy of this.
on Board Game Geek, the weight is 1.65.
Dang it, I'm super off.
Yeah, I think you were thinking it's heavier, like more towards a medium game, but you know, it's more like a family weight game, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So lower than 2. And then the average rating here, as you can see, 7.1. So we might be enjoying it more than the Board Game Geek community at this point. Years after it came out, it's understandable. But then the last thing John and I wanted to kind of mention some thoughts on are that there was a second edition of this game. And let me go to that Board Game Geek page. A second edition of the game that came out last year.
7.5. Look.
7.5. And so this edition is actually by Simon or Cool Mini or Not. And so they got the rights to it after Arcane Wonders. So I think that's why the new version doesn't have the Dice Tower Essential branding on it anymore. But we all know it was a Dice Tower Essentials game. But then this second edition has a new look to it, and we'll look at that a little bit. But then it also mentions that, you know, it has slightly updated rules. So I think maybe more just cleaning up the rules, not necessarily changing much about it. And then it includes the expansion with it. So the 6 Merchant, Black Market, and the Deputies. And so that's something to know with this version if you are interested in getting this game. But then to share our thoughts on it, because John and I had looked at this a little bit basically a year ago when I had stumbled across it when I think it just kind of came out or was announced. And admittedly, I would say it looks worse. Like that was, I think, both of our reactions. Like, what? And so let me go.
And the best part is, even as Ben mentioned, he isn't a great fan of the artwork. It's not bad, but he's just not a super fan of this kind of artwork. But the new artwork, he's even less of a fan of.
Yeah, and I think it's not even like necessarily just the artwork, but it's also like the graphic design, right?
Yeah.
Like
how and we'll go over it real quick.
Components are set up now. So this is an image of the first edition components, the ones that of the version I've been showing that we've been talking about. Yeah. So these are the player boards, right? Very bright, solid color, the character on it, you know, nice kind of just division of the different goods on the sides and contraband on the top. And then here is an image of, here's an image of the different cards, right? All the legal goods are green and green bordered, and they have the money amount at the top, penalty amount at the bottom right, with that red symbol. And then obviously the red cards are the contraband ones. So very easy to see visually, simple to understand. And this is actually an image I meant to show earlier during our explanations, but this is kind of what a player's setup will be at the end of the game or later on in the game, right? They'll have all the goods of a given type kind of staggered outward next to its specific location on the market stand, right? Like all the apples are here, all the players' cheese are here, chicken's here. Then the player has their money, their own bag, and then contraband face down. So that's kind of what it looks like, right? Even the back of the cards have this uniform wood kind of look to it, which is kind of the style of the first edition. And so now going on to the art and components of the new edition, the second edition, this is what the player boards look like. And I already think this is worse. I don't know if they thought it was better, and maybe someone can let me know why they think this, from a graphic design or understanding point of view is better. Like, I guess it does emphasize what good it is, and then the top shows the king bonus, bottom shows the queen bonus, and
Yeah.
like, you know, gold or silver bonus. But just it looks like
It's
more crowded now. You know?
yeah, like I think the difficulty in this one is one, there's a lot of other busyness that's going on in the background of like the
Mm.
stalls and stuff that aren't adding anything to the card, and it's because the symbols that are being shown on like the king and the queen cards are not kind of like blackened, right? Where it's very clearly distinct from everything else. It almost feels like the things that you should be paying attention to kind of blend into the background. And you're like, kind of like, what am I actually looking at to know what I'm doing to place my cards, right? And the turn order, it's smaller, kind of on the bottom. And then there's also this weird like border on the edge, like the wooden border.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Doesn't
Like, I
add
think,
anything at all
yeah, I
to
think
it.
the border on it, but then also like, so there's that border, and then all of these have a framing too, which I
Exactly.
think is just too much framing going on, you know,
Yeah.
to like really point out like these are the things that you have to look at. And it's like, why do you have to be like that game? Where it's like, if you look at the original, it's like it's cleaner, it's simpler, just like a single border.
Yeah.
And it even has the words for the goods, which I think is important. The new one didn't, I just noticed.
And it also uses the image that's on the cards here. I think the images on the second edition, it shows a symbol of like apple, cheese, chicken, and stuff. I don't, well, maybe if we go to
Yeah,
those,
let's look at
maybe
the
it is the
card.
symbol, but
It
yeah,
is.
see, it's not even the same looking
Yeah.
symbol.
Oh no, I think
as-
it is. I think it is.
Oh, or these are maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. These
So
are.
maybe it is, but I mean, then
But
you
I
look
don't.
at
But
this
no. But
artwork
I would
compared
say
to
I
the
don't
other
like.
artwork. This
I don't like
artwork
these
doesn't
symbols.
look as good.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I don't like these symbols. It's like this is kind of a too realistic look
Yeah.
at bread and cheese to have all this like shading in on cheese and the shadow since
Yeah.
it's a slice of cheese. It's like really you can't. Is it
Like
so
the
hard to
cheese
tell?
wheel looks so much better, right?
Yeah, when you just have like a cheese wheel like this over here, it's like it's. I don't know. This seems less appealing to me, and it's. I guess maybe it's this weird kind of like realistic good, and then like super cartoony like sheriff face here, and then that's also really. I think this part might be a little clearer for people instead of like a penalty on a red symbol in the bottom, you know,
And then the gold
like you
on the
can see
top,
the
right?
actual money here and then the penalty symbol. But I think it kind of takes away from like the elegance of how it looks to just kind of be like, this is the money and this is the angry thing you don't want. You know, it's like,
And the other thing about these cards is like you lost all the background art in the old cards, like the full art of the old cards, where the card, it emphasized what the item was as the primary piece of the picture. And it still has the words, and it does show you kind of the money value and, you know, the contraband, you know, payment in, on, as we said, kind of a much more elegant way, where you can kind of emphasize the artwork of what these items are and still get all the other things across, versus in the new ones, it just feels like there's a lot of white space.
yeah, there's a lot of space for nothing. And I think,
just,
and I do think what you pointed out, yeah, with the label of the good on it and on the player board, like I find that weird to take out, you know, because I think there's been another game we reviewed where it's annoying when they don't tell you what the things are called, you know?
Yeah.
Like obviously in this case it's obvious, like you can tell what they are from looking, but then the older card had a big picture which was more obvious, and it still put a little word at the bottom in case you know just want to know what to call it. But yeah, I do not like how these goods or these contraband, like especially the contraband where it's like, I mean, it doesn't. Well, I guess it did play in with like the black market, what kind of contraband you're bringing, right? Like it has to be pepper to get the one that the black market bonus for having 3 pepper. But then these are all contraband, but they don't say what they are, right? This is blue cheese, right? It looks like it, but it's like
3 cheeses. It constitutes as 3. right? So it's the symbolism, the symbology is like,
Mm.
this is worth 3 cheese values, or this is
Oh,
worth 2
okay,
chicken
okay.
values, is the idea. But my problem with that, also from a thematic standpoint, is as a merchant, I'm not just bringing in like 1 chicken or like 1 apple into the stall, right? Like technically when the goods card is like apple, but like in the old version, it's like it shows like a barrel of apples, right? Or like a lot of apples. Cause it's like as a merchant, I'm bringing in a lot of apples. Like I'm not going to be bringing 1 apple like thematically, right? Well, I guess the chicken is 1 in this case, but you know, conceptually though, it feels right. Like
Yeah, like this basket.
these cards feel they feel like more of like, this is what I, as a merchant, that's what I'm going to be doing. The other cards, for some reason, it just doesn't feel like it has the same appeal of like the coolness of these items that I'm bringing in. Like this basically is saying, oh, I'm bringing in 2 apples. Oh, I'm bringing in 3 yellow apples. Okay, cool. Right. But I don't know. It just doesn't feel as.
Yeah, I think I get kind of what you're saying. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of stripped down to just being this symbol and quantity.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think, and like what I was getting at too is that I feel like the specific kind of contraband does matter in certain cases, at least with the original game.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if these are supposed to be more than just 3 cheese, but like 3 certain kind of cheese that then
3 blue
satisfies some
cheeses.
other goal, you know?
Yeah.
So,
But then that's the thing, it doesn't tell you what they are unless I
yeah,
guess those cards must use the symbology as well. Or I
maybe.
hope they would,
Mhm.
because otherwise it's kind of weird.
Yeah, or in like a worst case, it's like the contraband literally is just 3 cheese versus a single cheese, and it's like, why is that contraband? Right? Why is
Exactly.
bringing more cheese different from bringing my 1 cheese?
Exactly. Right.
So yeah, I would think it should be, say, blue cheese in this case and a different kind of cheese in this case, but yeah, it's not written, and that causes a problem, I think, because then you maybe even have to just look it up in the rules if you don't know what these symbols are initially, which could probably be easy to remember, but it could have also been easy to just write in small text like they did before what it actually is.
And maybe there were some licensing issues or whatever because they acquired the rights and they didn't want to look exactly like the old game, but still.
So yeah, so this is the 2nd edition of Sheriff Nottingham. I mean, I think even the art of the sheriff looks a little too Disney villainy. I don't like, I thought the original fit all right. Like it had
Like this guy.
kind of like a warm, yeah, like had like not warm like you want to approach that guy, but you know, it's like the look isn't like this, like, you know, blue faded out background with this colorful, really dramatic face. It's just kind of this old time Robin Hood serious sheriff in the original version, right? And so, but anyways, those are our thoughts on this 2nd edition. I would say the surprising part that does seem like a smart choice is that they include the expansion with it.
Yeah.
So you could just get the one thing and have all you need, I guess. But I am glad I have the 1st edition. So, and if that is available, I would think that's the one that both of us would probably recommend still, getting the 1st edition if you can.
Ironically, a 2nd edition not looking as good as updated, not as good as the 1st edition. It's not common. Usually they look better.
Yeah, especially by Simon, right? Like they do really crazy productions, and yet somehow a simple game like this, their graphic design seemed worse.
Yeah.
But anyways, those are our thoughts on Sheriff of Nottingham. So for the original game, right, John and I both gave it a 7.5. And so if you found this video interesting, helpful, I hope you'll share it with friends, family, people you play board games with. Hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel and following us on Instagram at IGotBoardGame. And until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.